Chapter 5 1. Linguistics. Listen to a lecture in a linguistics class. Fill in the diagram with the information that you hear.
Yesterday, we started talking about how linguists study etymology, which is the study of the history of words. Today, I want to continue with that discussion by describing some of the ways that etymologists think that new words are formed. One of the most common ways that new words are added to a language is by the borrowing of words from other languages. Now, these borrowed words are called loanwords in linguistics. Loanwords are almost never translated and are pretty much taken directly from a foreign language. Another way that new words are created is through compounding or derivation. These are two different concepts, but we'll discuss them together. Compounding is when two separate words are put together. One example of a compound word is skyscraper. So sky plus scraper equals skyscraper. Derivation, on the other hand, is when prefixes or suffixes are added to a word. An example of a word that was created through derivation is enrich. The prefix "n" has been added to the word rich in this case. Another interesting case is when the origin of a word comes from an invention, like when speakers attempt to imitate sounds with language. If you think back to English class, you'll remember that a word that sort of imitates the sound it is supposed to represent is called onomatopoeia. Click, buzz, and boom are examples of imitative words.
1. How is the discussion organized? Two. Why does the professor mention the subject of the previous lecture? 3. Why does the professor mention the word skyscraper? 2. Biology. Listen to a lecture in a biology class. Fill in the diagram with the information that you hear.
This week, we've been talking about the different qualities and functions of blood. Let's see, we talked about the makeup of blood early in the week, then for the last lecture, we focused specifically on the blood of mammals. Everyone okay with that? Well then, for today's lecture, I wanted to talk a little bit about blood production and degradation and the process of it all. The term for the process of generating new blood is called hematopoiesis. That is actually spelled pretty much like it sounds. Hematopoiesis. Okay, so what hematopoiesis entails is the creation of new blood cells. And where might you guess that this takes place? Okay, this is imperative, so make sure to write this down. New blood cells are created in the bone marrow, specifically red bone marrow. The bone marrow, I'm sure you remember, is the tissue located on the inside of bone. Are we all still on the same page so far? Okay. As for the degradation of blood, the next step, most of it takes place in the spleen. Oh, I mean breaking down when I say degradation. There are also special cells in the liver that degrade blood cells. In a healthy person, blood cells are typically replaced in 120-day cycles. Cells are replaced, by the way, to keep the body healthy. We'll go into more depth about that next.
1. How does the professor organize the information about the production of new blood? 2. Why does the professor make a distinction between red bone marrow and regular bone marrow? 3. Why does the professor mention liver cells? 3. Zoology. Listen to a lecture in a zoology class. Fill in the diagram with the information that you hear.
Well, I hadn't really planned on going over this, but one of the students asked me about it and, well, I think it's pertinent to a discussion on anthrozoology. Anyway, today's lecture is going to be about the sport called falconry. Since we're talking about the relationships between humans and animals, we'll contrast this discussion with our previous topic of people and dogs. Falconry is a sport that began in Central Asia about, 4,000 years ago. In essence, a person would raise and train a falcon and then use the falcon to hunt. The falcon will hunt for food when its trainer decrees, and it will bring back whatever prey it finds. This correlates closely with how we said that dogs and people hunt together. However, the motivations are where things start to diverge. We discussed how dogs have a bond with people. They want to please their owners. However, falcons don't really bond with owners. In fact, they really only hunt to get a meal, not to please anyone but themselves. We, people, are actually the enemy, naturally. That's probably why falconry isn't really a popular sport, especially for hunting. But some people still do it today, but mostly just because they, like falcons, I suppose.
1. How does the professor organize the lecture? Two. Why does the professor mention the relationship between dogs and people? 3. How does the professor support the idea that falcons do not form bonds with humans? Four. Psychology. Listen to a discussion in a psychology class. Fill in the diagram with the information that you hear.
Now moving on, there's another experiment that was done in 1908 that is also related to learning, but it was trying to prove a slightly different theory. The basic idea here was motivation, how motivation affects performance, or in other words, let me just tell you about the experiment and how it showed that excessive motivation can actually hurt performance rather than help it.
I think I remember hearing about something like this. It was a study done by, Yerkes and
Dodson, yes. So, what they did was put a mouse basically in a maze, where there would be different colored exits, either white or black, in random places. And Yerkes wanted to see how long it would take the mouse to learn to use only one of the exits, and how its learning would be affected by different intensities of motivation. In this case, the motivation was an electric shock. Nothing that would harm the mouse, mind you, just a little shock when it made a mistake, like if you pinch yourself. So the researchers used a few different levels of motivation, of electric shock, to see how the mouse would react to it, to see how it affected the speed with which the mouse learned to pick the correct exit. Any ideas on how the level of motivation, the level of shock, related to the speed of learning?
I'd guess that the highest level of motivation caused the mouse to learn the fastest. Seems obvious.
It all depends, actually. They found that given an undemanding task, higher levels of motivation generally caused the mouse to learn faster. If given a slightly more difficult task, a medium level of shock actually helped the mouse learn the fastest. The higher levels actually started to affect the mouse negatively. With the highest difficulty, the hardest task, the mouse actually learned most easily with lower levels of motivation, electric shock. And to the mice, choosing the right door was, kind of hard. When you consider it, it actually makes a lot of sense. If you're stressed out about taking a test, the stress can cloud your mind, and you might not perform very well.
1. How does the professor organize the lecture? 2. How does the professor clarify her point about electric shock? 3. Why does the professor mention taking a test? 5. Economics. Listen to a discussion in an economics class. Fill in the diagram with the information that you hear.
Today's lecture will spark a lot of discussion, and I just want to let you know that I welcome it, so please feel free to jump in. I'm going to talk about why Marxism failed. Many economists today agree that Marxism is basically just a bunch of trite maxims that don't reflect reality. But, is it? Well, why don't we get started? Okay, so I guess one big shortcoming of Marxism is that it mainly emphasizes class struggle, and therefore doesn't include other social forces that may divide a society, such as race. Does everybody understand what that means?
Sure. You just mean that class isn't the only divider in a society, right?
Exactly. But that's minor compared to the next point. The next reason for the failure of Marxism is so obvious, you're going to wonder why Marx never thought of it himself. Marx said that the value of a product, and indeed the value of a business itself, is a function of two things: workers' efforts plus the value of the machinery that workers use to make whatever product it is they're making. Oh, and when Marx said workers, he meant specifically the people who do the manufacturing of products. Okay? Seems like an erroneous assumption if you ask me. Who can tell me why?
I'll take a stab at it. So you said value equals workers' efforts plus machinery. But what about the value of management, for one? I mean, the skill of management is really what holds a business together and advances a business.
Right. Anything else?
Well, sure. What about the value of marketing? Like, what would some of these big, highly successful companies be without marketing and salespeople, and accountants and strategic planners and…
Okay, you've got it for sure. To say that the value of a business is only a function of manufacturing effort and the machinery is, well, pretty naive.
1. How does the professor organize the information in the lecture? 2. Why does the professor mention economists? 3. Why does the student mention the value of management? 6. Art history. Listen to a lecture in an art history class. Fill in the diagram with the information that you hear.
I noticed that many of you still aren't sure about the differences between Impressionism and Post-Impressionism. You got the similarities: vivid colors, a thick application of paint. Let me make some further points to help you understand the distinctions. The Impressionists started off as a group of artists who just wanted to do something different than what was currently being prescribed by the Academy of Fine Arts in 19th century France. The Impressionists departed from tradition by painting contemporary scenes. Additionally, they painted open-air scenes and landscapes. This is significant because before the Impressionists, nobody painted landscapes. On the other hand, the Post-Impressionists felt like the scenes painted in Impressionist works were too trivial. They felt like, that there wasn't any emotion. So they stressed emotion in their paintings, and therefore focused more on people. Should I sum up? Couldn't hurt. When you think Impressionist, think landscapes without much emotion, and with the Post-Impressionists, think human subjects and more emotion. Now, moving on, there were also some artistic methods, some techniques that differed between the two. With Impressionism, it's suggested that Claude Monet one day just decided to walk outside and start painting. He felt like it was important to capture something at that very moment, in the state it was in. So what this translates to is very quick brushstrokes and a focus on the way that the light at that time of the day affects a piece. But with the post-impressionists, they generally took a few different, people like Van Gogh and Seurat took more time with their brushstrokes. Van Gogh used a lot of swirling patterns, while Seurat made tiny dots of color to form a picture. And instead of being concerned with lighting, they cared more about capturing the emotion of the subject than capturing the light of a landscape.
1. How does the professor organize the information presented in the lecture? Two. Why does the professor discuss the Academy of Fine Arts? 3. Why does the professor mention artistic methods? 7. Business. Listen to a discussion in a business class. Fill in the diagram with the information that you hear.
All right, we've been talking about advertising theory for a long time. We'll be wrapping up our advertising unit soon. Anyway, today we're going to go over another popular method of advertising, and we'll cover the pros and cons of it. Oh, before we move on, are there any questions about attractiveness?
Excuse me, we never went over attractiveness.
Oh, you know what? I used the term likability, but it's the same concept. That's my mistake. Anyway, we'll probably return to that in today's discussion about spokespeople. Let me get right to it. Well then, at the moment I want to focus on owners who become the spokesperson for the company. This has happened with some frequency through recent advertising. Car dealers are the most likely to do this, I'd say. Anyway, sorry, lost my train of thought.
Owner spokespersons, spokespeople?
That's right, thank you. I'll start with the advantages. The first is really just a monetary advantage. Some advertisers hire an actor, maybe somebody famous. Sure, people pay attention when they see a famous person on the screen. We've already talked about that. But this comes at a price, as you know. When it comes to a company's owners, well, you don't have to pay an owner. No money has to change hands, and therefore the advertising becomes less expensive. Another advantage is that it can give an advertisement a sense of authority. If a message is coming straight from the owner of the company, it can give an authoritative vibe, a feeling to the message. People might be more likely to believe what the speaker has to say. Okay, well, an owner spokesperson doesn't always work. Back to likability. First of all, well, some people just don't belong in front of a camera. I'm sure you've seen a commercial where some guy is standing there, stiff as a board, reading lines off of a card in a monotone voice. Not an effective way to advertise. This is because some people just aren't good at delivery, and no one wants to watch someone like that. Second, sometimes the opposite happens. If you have someone who is too excited, too egotistical, or whatever the case may be, it will give people a bad impression of the company. It just sends the wrong message when someone gets up there and, thinks they're better than everyone else. Of course, the point of advertising is to say you're better than the competition, but you have to do it right, or it just alienates potential customers.
1. How does the professor organize the lecture on owner spokespeople? 2. Why does the professor mention likability? 3. Why does the professor mention actors? 8. Zoology. Listen to a discussion in a zoology class. Fill in the diagram with the information that you hear.
Good morning, class.
Good
morning,
Professor.
Wow, you're all in a good mood today. That's good, because we're going to be going over a pretty, involved and difficult topic. So I recommend a lot of participation today because it is really going to help you understand these concepts. Anyway, we're going to be going over the theory of memory in animals, and I'm going to support the theory with a specific example. But I'll save that for a little later. First, to introduce it all, what do you think the relationship is between animal size and memory function?
I'd have to guess that the bigger the animal, the better the memory.
Actually, there's not a concrete correlation to be seen here, so this leads us to the topic for today. I want you all to understand that some animals have much more developed memories than you would have ever anticipated. One such type of animal is, well, an insect.
An insect? I can't imagine a tiny insect having a great memory.
Well, there's a study that substantiates this fact. The study involved an experiment where a group of researchers placed a circle of pine cones around a female wasp's nest. The wasp was inside the nest when this happened. So what the wasp did, the wasp left the nest and started checking out the pine cones, getting acquainted with their positions, making sure they weren't a threat. That kind of thing. So when the wasp left the area, a researcher moved the circle of pine cones a little distance away from the nest. It was the same pattern, but it was a few feet away from the nest.
What, and the wasp came back and thought the nest was still in the middle of the pine cones?
That's exactly what happened. The wasp flew straight to the middle of the pine cone circle and buzzed around for a little while, seeming confused. So, what is it that we can deduce from this experiment?
Well, it seems to me that wasps have extremely developed memories.
Perhaps. I mean, it certainly proves that wasps have some sort of memories. Probably more than we would have imagined.
Well, doesn't it suggest something about the nature of a wasp's memory? I mean, how it works?
That's what I was getting at. I mean, in a way, that's a whole different topic, but I did want to put that out there.
1. How does the professor organize the discussion? Two. Why does the professor mention the relationship between memory and animal size? 3. Why does the professor discuss the study of a female wasp? 9. Psychology. Listen to a lecture in a psychology class. Fill in the diagram with the information that you hear.
Today's lecture is going to be very interesting. During the course of the semester, the nature versus nurture debate has come up a couple of times, and today I'm going to present both sides of the argument. Before we start, let me just reiterate the basics of the debate involving how we develop personalities. The idea is this. Some people believe the intrinsic qualities of each individual, the nature of a person, so to speak, are more influential than the qualities that come from the individual's experience, the parts that are assumed to have been nurtured. Then there are people that believe the opposite. Are we all more or less clear about that? Okay, let's move on then. Anyway, let me start with the nature theory, which would assume that people's personalities arise as a result of their innate traits they were born with. The strongest argument for the nature theory is heredity. In order to test this theory, scientists usually test twins. For example, a lot of twin studies go like this. They'll observe twins who obviously share the same genetic traits. The thing is, they'll be in different environments, and time again, the results have shown that the twins exhibit striking similarities in terms of personality. Nature supporters argue that this wouldn't be possible if the twins' genes didn't influence their personality. So, to recap, The nature theory says that people are born with certain traits that affect their personalities. I hope that's clear. Now, let's not forget that there's some pretty compelling evidence on the other side of the argument as well. The nurture argument is based on the idea of tabula rasa. Tabula rasa is Latin for blank slate, and the concept is basically that humans are blank slates when they are born, fresh tablets waiting to be written on, so to speak. As we grow up, we learn from the world around us. I want to bring up B.F. Skinner, who will sound familiar to you because we studied his work on conditioning, responses to conditions. What Skinner did is actually very important to this debate because it is completely based on the hypothesis that behavior is learned and not innate. He suggested that we learn everything after we're born. Genes aren't involved in personality. It's all about environments. Now, keep in mind, we can combine these two theories, and they can both be partially right. They aren't mutually exclusive.
1. How does the professor organize the information about the nature versus nurture debate? Two. How does the professor clarify the points she makes about the nature theory? 3. Why does the professor discuss B.F. Skinner? 10. Art history. Listen to a discussion in an art history class. Fill in the diagram with the information that you hear.
Today we're going to talk about two important art movements of the 20th century, Cubism and Surrealism. I want our focus to be on how they are constructed, rather than any sort of historical stuff. So, we'll start off by talking about how the Cubists thought of their art. Let's open up the discussion. Any thoughts? Yes.
Well, I seem to remember reading about how Cubism began. It was Picasso and Georges Braque. They thought of art in terms of little cubes.
That's true. Let me expand on that. What Cubism, Cubist art, tries to do is take apart a scene or a subject and tries to put it back together using geometric shapes, like cubes, hence the name Cubism. Is that clear?
Well, the thing I wonder is, everything is made of shapes anyway, right? So how is Cubism really different?
Good question. Putting the shapes back together really isn't all of it. The most important part of it is that the shapes have to be reassembled in an abstract way. So maybe a cube goes at the end of an arm where a hand usually would be. Therefore, it's more abstract. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and actually, can I say something about Surrealism? If we're done with Cubism?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so from what I recall, Surrealism had the same idea of distorting reality, right? But the Surrealists did it in a different way. I remember someone saying that the best way to describe Surrealism was to think of it as putting real things in a dream world.
You know, I like that idea. I'd say Surrealism is very much like that. But in artistic terms, they took actual things and merged them in strange ways, rather than reassemble them in different shapes. So, like in Dolly's works, you might see clocks on a table out in the desert melting clocks, and a tree growing out of the table. You wouldn't usually see those things in real life, right? At least not together. So, it's almost like being in a dream world, even just looking at the painting.
1. How does the professor organize the information about the two art movements? 2. Why does the professor mention geometric shapes? 3. Why does the student mention distorting reality?